Welcome to the Psychology of Good and Evil, a practical examination. A line from Romans, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good," has often been interpreted as a spiritual or moral ideal. But its real power becomes more visible when we ask, what does this mean psychologically? What is it, in human experience, to be overcome by evil? What is the nature of a good that can overcome it? We are not dealing here with theological abstractions. We are talking about real events: betrayal, loss, cruelty, abuse, injustice. When a person experiences harm, the first response is not always reflection. It's often instinctive: rage, fear, withdrawal, vengeance. In these moments, something is at stake, not just in the world, but within the person. To be overcome by evil is to allow that injury to set the terms of one's response. It is to be pulled into the logic of the very thing that wounded you. But the second half of the verse offers an alternative: to overcome evil with good. That is, to introduce something different. Break the cycle, interrupt the repetition, respond not in kind but in contrast. This is not just a moral idea, it's a psychological process. And we can explore how it plays out through a series of established psychological frameworks, each of which gives us a slightly different lens on how human beings wrestle with internal conflict, external harm, and the search for integration. Sigmund Freud's theory of the psyche proposes three major components: the ID, the ego, and the superego. These are not physical parts of the brain, but functional systems, ways the mind organizes and responds to experience. The ID is the source of instinctual drive. It operates according to the pleasure principle and seeks immediate gratification: food, sex, power, release. It knows no morality, only impulse. In moments of threat or desire, the ID wants to act now. The superego, by contrast, is the internalized voice of norms, ideals, prohibitions. It holds the rules passed down by parents, culture, and society. It says what one ought to do, even if the ID demands otherwise. Between these forces sits the ego, the conscious mediator. The ego navigates reality, weighs consequences, and tries to satisfy the ID's needs in ways the superego can tolerate. It is the part of the psyche that has to choose. When someone is overcome by evil, in this frame, it might mean that the ID has overwhelmed the ego. Raw impulses, anger, violence, revenge, are acted out without mediation. The person loses their capacity for judgment and becomes reactive. Alternatively, the superego might dominate, leading to self-punishment, shame, or paralysis. The command to overcome evil with good could then be understood as an exhortation to the ego: do not let instinct or guilt dictate your actions. Instead, act from a stable center, one that integrates desire, morality, and external reality. Use your inner structure not to suppress, but to redirect. This is not repression, it is transformation. It's about giving form to impulse through value. Carl Jung's model introduces another way to understand the moral and psychological conflict embedded in the verse. For Jung, the psyche is structured around tensions between the conscious and unconscious, and the journey toward wholeness involves integrating these hidden parts of ourselves. The persona is the face we present to the world. It's shaped by roles, expectations, and social approval. It's useful, it helps us function, but it is not the whole of who we are. Beneath it lies the shadow, the repository of all the aspects of the self that have been rejected, denied, or hidden. This can include socially unacceptable impulses, but also creativity, vitality, and authenticity. If the shadow is not acknowledged, it tends to leak out through projection, self-sabotage, or unconscious behavior. The self, in Jungian thought, is the archetype of wholeness. It represents the totality of the psyche, integrating both the conscious and the unconscious, the light and the dark. In this frame, being overcome by evil often means being ruled by the shadow, either through identification with it, acting destructively, or through projection, seeing evil only in others, never in oneself. When the persona is too rigid and the shadow too suppressed, conflict and fragmentation emerge. To overcome evil with good is, in Jungian terms, to begin the process of shadow integration. Goodness here is not moral purity, it is psychological wholeness. It is the refusal to let the disowned parts of the psyche control behavior from the shadows. Instead, it involves bringing those parts into conscious relationship with the rest of the self. It's a work of inner reconciliation. Cognitive behavioral therapy, often called CBT, offers a more direct and structured model. Here, human experience is understood as a loop involving thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. How we think about a situation influences how we feel, which in turn influences how we act, and how we act feeds back into how we think. In this view, to be overcome by evil is to let distorted or automatic thoughts, often rooted in past trauma, run the system. The person is trapped in a cycle. The alternative, overcoming evil with good, requires conscious intervention. That might mean pausing to reflect on the thought. Is it true? Is it helpful? It might mean choosing a behavior that reflects a deeper value rather than a momentary impulse. Goodness in CBT is alignment with what you most want your life to be about, not what your most intense emotions demand. It's a practical form of inner authorship, reclaiming the capacity to interpret, feel, and act intentionally rather than reactively. In this model, good isn't just the opposite of evil, it's a reset of the entire loop. In therapeutic models that deal with trauma, such as narrative therapy or temporal integration, time becomes a central category. People who have experienced pain often become stuck in the past. Events that were never fully processed continue to color, present perceptions, and limit future imagination. The past holds memory, trauma, identity-shaping experiences. The present is the only space where change is possible, and the future is where new possibilities live. But only if the past is not dictating its shape. To be overcome by evil is to be bound to an unhealed past. Something happened, a betrayal, a loss, an abandonment, and that event still defines the story. The person can't move forward because the event hasn't been given new meaning. Overcoming evil with good in this framework means using the present to re-narrate the past and reclaim the future. That might mean telling the story differently, feeling the pain fully, or making new choices that contradict the old wound. Goodness here is the capacity to author a future not determined by harm. It is the act of imagination after injury. Finally, in humanistic and existential psychology, the focus is on becoming whole, not perfect, but integrated. The process unfolds in three major movements. First is awareness, seeing clearly, becoming conscious of what we've hidden, feared, or ignored. Second is acceptance, staying present with what we find, without judgment or defense. Third is integration, bringing the various parts of ourselves into coherent relationship, allowing the self to act authentically and freely. In this light, being overcome by evil is what happens when we split off parts of ourselves, when we live in denial, resistance, or fear. We try to be good by rejecting what feels bad, but that creates division, not strength. To overcome evil with good is to include, not to exclude. It is to meet one's own darkness with compassion and clarity, and to act not out of shame, but out of deep congruence. Goodness is not the eradication of conflict, it is the presence of selfhood in the midst of conflict. Across all these models, the essential insight of Romans 12:21 remains intact but reframed. Good and evil are not just moral choices, they are psychological patterns, internal systems of relation, tension, and transformation. To be overcome by evil is to become reactive, fragmented, or caught in a loop. To overcome evil with good is to act from coherence, integration, and authorship. It requires the work of reflection, regulation, connection, and often healing. What the verse proposes is not an ideal so much as a method. Refuse to let the worst thing define you. Introduce something new. Break the pattern, not by force but by self-possession. That is the logic of transformation, and that is the real psychology of goodness.